It was a blistering summer afternoon when Jake, a hardworking mechanic, was headed home after a long day at the shop, covered in grease and exhausted. All he could think about was getting home to rest. But just as he passed a quiet country road, he noticed a car pulled over on the side, with a woman standing next to it, looking helpless. She was staring at a flat tire, phone in hand, clearly trying to figure out her next move. Without hesitation, Jake pulled over. He wasn't the type to just drive by when someone needed help, especially not when it came to cars. As he stepped out of his truck, the sun glaring overhead, he called out to the woman, "Need a hand with that?" She turned around, visibly relieved, but a bit hesitant, clearly caught off guard by the sudden appearance of a stranger offering assistance. She was well-dressed, almost too well-dressed for someone dealing with a flat tire on a rural road, and she looked like someone who had never changed a tire in her life. "Yeah, I think I'm a bit out of my depth here," she said, with a soft laugh, her voice kind, but carrying an edge of nervousness. Jake quickly grabbed his tools, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work without asking too many questions. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, used to solving problems without needing much conversation. To him, she was just another person needing a hand, and he was more than happy to help. He certainly didn't expect anything in return. As he knelt by the car, loosening the lug nuts and replacing the flat with the spare, they exchanged some small talk. She told him her name was Rachel, and she had been driving through town after visiting a friend. Nothing too specific, nothing out of the ordinary, but Jake couldn't help but notice that there was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, or how calm she seemed, despite the situation. Most people in her shoes would be flustered, frustrated, and maybe even panicking, but not Rachel. She was composed. When the job was done, Rachel offered to pay Jake for his help, but he quickly waved it off. "No need for that," he said, brushing his hands on his already dirty jeans. "Just doing what anyone else would do." She smiled, clearly grateful, but there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something Jake didn't catch. With a nod of thanks, she got back into her car and drove off, leaving Jake standing by the side of the road, none the wiser. Little did he know, this brief encounter was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. As Jake drove home, he thought nothing more of the event. It was just another day, another good deed done. But Rachel wasn't just another passerby. She wasn't just any woman in need of help. What Jake didn't know was that Rachel was, in fact, a millionaire, one who had built a successful business from the ground up. She wasn't flashy about her wealth, but she was always keeping an eye out for people like Jake, people who went out of their way to help others, expecting nothing in return. And Rachel had a habit of rewarding those people in ways they could never expect. But what exactly would happen next? And how would this simple act of kindness come back to Jake in a way he never saw coming? Would he even recognize Rachel if she reappeared in his life? Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning of a story that proves that sometimes helping a stranger can lead to incredible, life-changing opportunities. And for Jake, life as he knew it was about to take a surprising turn. Jake returned to his usual routine at the mechanic shop, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Every day it was the same grind, fixing cars, making ends meet, and doing whatever he could to stay afloat. Life hadn't been easy for Jake. He had grown up in a small town, never really having much, and the idea of wealth or luxury was something far removed from his daily reality. But he was content in his own way. He liked working with his hands, the feeling of accomplishment that came from solving problems. It kept his mind off other things, like the bills piling up or how he still hadn't caught a break in all these years. Meanwhile, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the man who had helped her that day. In her world, people rarely did anything without expecting something in return. She had spent years climbing the ladder of success, building her company from scratch, and along the way, she had seen firsthand how transactional most relationships could be. But Jake was different. He had no idea who she was, didn't care about her money or her status. He had just wanted to help, plain and simple, and that had stuck with her. Rachel wasn't one to let something like that go unnoticed. She did some digging, wanting to learn more about the man who had gone out of his way to assist a stranger. She found out that Jake owned a small mechanic shop that was struggling to stay open. Business wasn't what it used to be, and with bigger garages in town eating up most of the customers, Jake was barely scraping by. But there was something else Rachel discovered. Jake had a reputation for helping others. He had quietly fixed cars for people who couldn't afford to pay, offered rides to stranded motorists, and never made a fuss about it. He was the kind of person who gave without expecting anything back. Rachel knew then that she had to do something. But this wasn't about charity or paying off a debt. It was about rewarding kindness in a world that often overlooked it. She decided to visit Jake again, but this time, not as a woman with a flat tire. This time, she would come as the millionaire. He didn't know she was. A few weeks later, Jake was at the shop when a sleek black luxury car pulled up outside. It was the kind of car that didn't usually make its way to his small garage. Curious, Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out to greet the driver. To his surprise, it was Rachel. She stepped out of the car, dressed in sharp, professional clothing that made her look like she had just come from an important meeting. Jake blinked, recognizing her, but unsure why she was there. "Jake," Rachel said with a smile. "I've been thinking about our last meeting, and I realized I didn't thank you properly for helping me out that day." Jake waved it off, just as he had before. "Really, it was nothing. I'm just glad I could help." But Rachel wasn't here to let it go this time. It wasn't nothing. People like you, people who help without expecting anything in return, they're rare, and I believe in rewarding that. Before Jake could respond, she handed him an envelope. He stared at it, confused. "What's this?" "Open it," Rachel said softly. Reluctantly, Jake opened the envelope. Inside was a check with more zeros on it than he had ever seen in his life. His heart raced as he looked up at Rachel in shock. I can't accept this," he stammered. "This is too much." But Rachel was firm. "It's not charity, Jake. Think of it as an investment. I know you've been struggling to keep this place open, and I want to help you. You helped me, and now it's my turn to return the favor." Jake's head spun. He didn't know what to say, how to respond. On one hand, this check could change everything. It could save his business, pay off his debts, maybe even give him the chance to expand. But on the other hand, it felt like too much. He had never asked for anything like this. He was just a guy trying to do the right thing. As Jake stood there, grappling with his decision, the tension between his pride and his need built up inside him. He had worked hard his whole life, and the thought of accepting something so large, so generous, made him feel like he was betraying that. But at the same time, he couldn't deny that he needed the help, and deep down, he knew that Rachel wasn't just throwing money at him out of pity. She genuinely wanted to support him. Rachel could see the conflict in Jake's eyes. "I know this is a lot," she said gently, "but you deserve it. You've helped so many people, and you deserve a break. Just think about it." Jake nodded, still speechless. He watched as Rachel got back into her car and drove away, leaving him standing in the middle of his shop, holding a check that had the power to change his entire life. But what would he do? Would he accept the gift and finally get the chance to turn things around? Or would his pride keep him from taking the opportunity in front of him? Jake sat at his workbench long after Rachel had driven away, staring at the check in his hands. The hum of the old fan in the corner was the only sound in the room, but his mind was racing. He had spent years keeping his head above water, barely making enough to cover the bills, and now here he was, holding a lifeline that could change everything. But there was a part of him that struggled with it. Would taking this money mean he was giving up his independence? Could he accept such generosity without feeling like he hadn't earned it? Over the next few days, Jake couldn't shake the weight of the decision. He kept the check in his jacket pocket, pulling it out from time to time to look at it, wondering what his next move should be. He knew the money could save his shop, maybe even allow him to hire some help and grow the business into something bigger. But he also knew that once he cashed that check, things would change. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. One evening, after a long day at work, Jake stopped by his favorite diner. It was a quiet place where he could think. As he sat at the counter sipping his coffee, he overheard a conversation between a couple sitting nearby. They were talking about how tough times had been lately, how their car had broken down, and they couldn't afford to get it fixed. Jake listened quietly, feeling a pang of familiarity. It reminded him of all the people he had helped over the years, never asking for anything in return. And it hit him. This wasn't just about the money. It was about what he could do with it. Suddenly, it all became clear. This wasn't charity. It wasn't about pride or independence. It was about opportunity, the chance to continue helping people on a larger scale, to keep his shop running, and to pay it forward, just like he always had. Jake knew what he had to do. The next morning, he called Rachel. "I've been thinking about your offer," he said, his voice steady, "and I want to accept it, but on one condition." Rachel was curious. "What's the condition?" "I want to use part of this money to help others, people who need it, just like I've been doing. This isn't just about saving my shop. I want to make sure I can keep paying it forward, the way you're doing for me." Rachel smiled on the other end of the line. "I wouldn't have it any other way, Jake. I knew you'd want to do something good with it. That's why I gave it to you." With that, Jake cashed the check, and things began to change, slowly at first, but steadily. He fixed up the shop, bought better tools, and started taking on more customers. But true to his word, he also set up a fund to help people who couldn't afford car repairs, offering his services at a reduced cost or even for free when needed. Word spread quickly around town, and before long, Jake's shop became known not just for its quality work, but for its kindness. One day, as he worked on a car for a young couple who had been struggling to make ends meet, Jake looked around the shop and smiled. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about making a difference, just like Rachel had made a difference for him. Rachel kept in touch, checking in from time to time to see how things were going. And although Jake never flaunted the fact that a millionaire had helped him out, he never forgot the lesson she taught him, that sometimes helping a stranger can lead to something bigger than you ever imagined. In the end, Jake's life didn't change because of the money itself. It changed because he chose to use that money to stay true to who he was. A guy who helped others, no matter what. And as he continued to fix cars and make a difference in his community, Jake realized that sometimes the most valuable things aren't the ones you can buy. They're the ones you give away. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life, knowing that a simple act of kindness had led to something far greater than he ever could have predicted.